What if the guilt you carry every day was never actually yours to begin with? Most people picture a narcissist as loud, boastful, obvious. That's a misconception. Covert narcissism operates quietly, through guilt, victimhood, and emotional withdrawal, making it far harder to name and nearly impossible to escape. Behavioral science examines why humans sometimes make choices that work against their own well-being. Children raised in these environments learn to suppress their own needs, not by accident, but because the system was calibrated to demand it. The covert narcissist's most powerful tool is guilt. Not the honest guilt that follows a genuine mistake, but a manufactured guilt, deployed strategically, designed to keep a child orbiting around a parent's emotional needs rather than their own. A covert narcissistic parent positions themselves as the victim of circumstances, of the other parent, of the child's ingratitude. The child learns early that the parent's suffering is always the most urgent thing in the room. When the child fails to comply, or simply has needs of their own, the covert narcissist withdraws, not with anger, with silence. A cold, heavy silence the child learns to read as evidence of their own inadequacy. Here's where it gets harder. The covert narcissist doesn't just control behavior, they erode perception. When a child says they felt hurt, the parent reframes it. The child is told they're too sensitive, too dramatic. This is the behavioral signature that follows adult children longest. Research by social psychologist Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia shows that contextual factors, including a caregiver's authority, shape what we believe about our own inner states. Here's the counterintuitive part. Covert narcissistic parents often appear self-sacrificing to the outside world. They speak constantly about everything they gave up for their children. That narrative of sacrifice is itself the mechanism of control. The child's emotional development gets quietly redirected. Instead of learning to identify and honor their own feelings, they become finely tuned instruments for reading the parent's mood. Always monitoring, always adjusting, always managing. For adult children of covert narcissists, guilt is an embedded contextual factor, present even when nothing is objectively wrong. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, shaping decisions, shrinking options, making ordinary moments feel like offenses waiting to be named. There's a particular erosion that happens when a child's needs are consistently subordinated to a parent's emotional state. The child stops believing their needs are legitimate. They stop asking. Eventually, they stop knowing what they need at all. So why is this dynamic so difficult to name while you're living inside it? The beliefs we form about our caregivers take shape before we have the cognitive tools to evaluate them. Love and dysfunction become indistinguishable. Hazel Rose Marcus, a leading scholar in cultural psychology, has shown how deeply culture shapes psychological experience. In many cultural contexts, naming a parent's harmful behavior feels like a profound betrayal, which keeps the pattern invisible even longer. One of the clearest behavioral signatures is parentification, when the child becomes the emotional support system for the adult, reversing the natural dependency. The child learns to comfort, soothe, and absorb the parent's anxiety. Their own nervous system never gets to rest. Affection in these households is rarely unconditional. It arrives when the child performs well, complies, or makes the parent look good. It disappears when the child asserts independence. The child learns that love is something to be earned, not given. The scientific approach to cause and effect differs from everyday perception. In everyday life, the child concludes, "I feel bad, so I must have done something wrong." Behavioral science reframes it. The environment produced the feeling, not a character flaw. Something measurable happens when you name a pattern accurately. UCLA neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman's affect labeling research found that putting feelings into words reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. Language gives the brain a container for what previously had no shape. The beliefs we hold today shape the reality we experience tomorrow. When an adult child recognizes that their chronic guilt was installed by a system designed to benefit someone else, the guilt doesn't vanish. but it loses its authority. A common misconception: naming covert narcissistic parenting isn't the same as condemning a person. Behavioral science distinguishes patterns from intentions. Many covert narcissistic parents were shaped by identical environments. The pattern is the problem. But here's one recognition alone can't answer. What does repair look like when the original wound is the erosion of your own perception? You can't simply decide to trust yourself. The distrust is wired deep. Behavioral science has been applied to some of the stickiest challenges in human behavior, including the slow rebuild of self-trust. The mechanism is repetition. Small, low-stakes decisions made and honored. Each one a data point that contradicts the old narrative. The behavioral signatures don't stay in the family home. Adult children of covert narcissists frequently enter relationships where they overfunction emotionally, apologize reflexively, and feel responsible for other people's moods. The pattern relocates. It doesn't dissolve. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk, whose research on trauma and the body spans 4 decades, documented how a nervous system shaped by early threat learns to stay permanently alert. That vigilance doesn't switch off when the child grows up and leaves. It runs quietly in the background, always. This isn't only a private matter. The CDC's Adverse Childhood Experiences Framework, which tracked health outcomes across more than 17,000 adults, links early family dysfunction to measurable lifelong consequences in physical and mental health. Covert narcissistic parenting fits squarely inside that data. Psychologist James Pennebaker at the University of Texas found that writing about difficult experiences in specific, named language produces measurable reductions in stress hormones and doctor visits. Adult children who find accurate words for what happened report a real shift, not in the past, but in their relationship to it. One of the hardest recalibrations is understanding that setting a limit with a parent isn't cruelty. The guilt that arrives when you do is the old system activating. Information about where you came from, not a verdict on who you are. Here's the part that no amount of insight makes easy. Some covert narcissistic parents will never acknowledge what happened. The adult child must find a way to heal without the validation they were denied in childhood. That's not fair. It is, however, possible. You call home and hang up 20 minutes later, feeling inexplicably flattened. Nothing specific was said, but somehow you're apologizing in your head for things that haven't happened yet. That's not a personality flaw. That's a trained response. For many people, recognition arrives through a single encounter. Reading psychologist Lindsay Gibson's book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, or hearing a therapist use the word parentification for the first time. The weight they've carried for decades suddenly has a name. The guilt you've carried, shapeless, sourceless, always there, was built by a system that needed you to feel it. Recognizing that doesn't end the work. So start small. The next time guilt arrives without a clear cause, write down what triggered it. That log is your first tool for separating installed guilt from earned guilt. Every pattern that was learned can, with the right conditions, be unlearned. That's not optimism. It's what decades of research on neuroplasticity confirm. The fact that you can now name what happened means the pattern has already lost some of its grip.